The rain fell in relentless sheets, soaking Ethan Caldwell's tailored suit as he sprinted through San Francisco's Tenderloin district, the city's underbelly pulsing with neon and despair. His heart pounded, not from the run, but from the woman crumpled against the alley wall, her frail form shivering under a tattered blanket. He couldn't look away. Her eyes, hollow yet defiant, held a story that demanded to be heard. Ethan, a tech millionaire whose name adorned skyscrapers, wasn't supposed to be here. He should have been at home in his Pacific Heights mansion, sipping wine with his husband, Julian, planning their next charity gala. But something had pulled him out tonight, a restless ache, a need to see the world beyond his polished life. Now, kneeling in the muck, he extended a hand to the stranger. "Come with me," he said softly. "You don't have to stay here." Her name was Lila, she told him later, voice raspy from days without enough water. She was 32, though her weathered skin made her look older, and her story spilled out in fragments as Ethan drove her to his mansion. She'd been a nurse once, before addiction and loss stripped everything away. Ethan listened, his grip tightening on the steering wheel, feeling the weight of her words settle into his bones. He'd always believed in second chances. His own life was proof of it, rising from a small-town nobody to a titan of industry. But this felt different, riskier, like he was crossing a line he couldn't see. At home, Julian waited in the foyer, his sharp cheekbones catching the chandelier's light. His eyes, usually warm with love, narrowed as Lila stepped inside, dripping and disheveled. "Ethan, what is this?" Julian's voice was low, controlled, but laced with something dangerous. Ethan explained quickly. Lila needed help, a place to stay, just for tonight. Julian's gaze flicked to Lila, then back to Ethan, his silence louder than any shout. "You don't know her," Julian said finally, his tone clipped. "You can't just bring strangers into our home." Ethan felt the accusation like a blade. Julian had always been the cautious one, the one who balanced Ethan's impulsive heart. But this wasn't impulse, Ethan insisted, it was humanity. "She's not a stranger," he said. "She's someone who needs us." Julian's jaw tightened, and he turned away, leaving Ethan with a sinking feeling that he'd just cracked something precious. Lila slept in the guest room that night, wrapped in clean linens, while Ethan lay awake beside Julian, the space between them colder than the rain outside. He thought of Lila's story, her sister's death, her spiral into homelessness, and wondered why it stirred him so deeply. Was it guilt for his wealth? Or something more? Something he couldn't name? Julian's breathing was steady, but Ethan knew his husband was awake too, wrestling with the same unspoken questions. The next morning, Ethan found Lila in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she held a mug of coffee. She looked out of place against the marble countertops, yet her presence felt oddly grounding. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes meeting his with a gratitude that made his chest ache. He wanted to ask more, to understand her, but Julian's footsteps interrupted, each one a warning. "We need to talk," Julian said, his voice colder now. "Alone." In the study, Julian didn't hold back. "You're risking everything, our safety, our life, for someone you met in an alley?" Ethan tried to explain, but Julian cut him off. "This isn't about charity, Ethan. This is about you. You're chasing something, and I don't know what it is, but it's not fair to me." Ethan's throat tightened. He loved Julian, loved the life they'd built, the battles they'd fought to be together in a world that hadn't always accepted them. But Lila's desperation had awakened something in him, a need to act, to fix, to matter beyond his bank account. "I'm not choosing her over you," Ethan said, reaching for Julian's hand. Julian pulled away. "Then prove it," he said. "Get her out of here by tonight or I will." The ultimatum hung heavy, and Ethan realized this wasn't just about Lila. It was about trust, about the fragile balance of their marriage. That afternoon, Ethan took Lila to a shelter, promising to check on her. Her quiet, "You're a good man," echoed in his mind as he drove back, but Julian's words drowned it out. At home, Julian was waiting, his eyes searching Ethan's for answers. "She's gone," Ethan said, but the tension didn't break. Julian nodded, but there was no warmth in it. "Good," he said and walked away. Ethan stood alone in the mansion, the silence deafening. He'd done what Julian asked, but the ache remained. Lila's face lingered in his thoughts, and with it, a question. Had he saved her, or had he just walked away from someone who needed him most? The answer, he feared, would change everything. Days passed, but the rift between Ethan and Julian grew wider, a silent chasm filled with unspoken accusations. Ethan couldn't shake Lila's image, her fragile frame, her eyes that held both pain and resilience. He told himself he'd done enough, that the shelter was the right move, but every night, he lay awake, wondering if she was safe. Julian noticed. "You're not here," he said one evening over dinner, his fork clattering against the plate. "Your body's here, but your mind's with her." Ethan wanted to deny it, but the truth was sharper than Julian's words. He wasn't obsessed with Lila, not in the way Julian feared, but her existence had cracked open a part of him he'd buried. The part that remembered hunger, fear, and the desperate need for someone to care. "I'm trying to do the right thing," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "I can't just forget her." Julian's eyes softened for a moment, but then hardened again. "You're not her savior, Ethan, and you're not mine either. I need my husband back." The words stung, but Ethan couldn't promise to let go. Not yet. He started visiting the shelter, telling himself it was just to check on Lila. She was still there, cleaner now, her hair tied back, but the haunted look remained. They talked about her past, her dreams of being a nurse again, her fear of slipping back into the streets. Ethan found himself drawn to her strength, her refusal to break completely. He brought her clothes, books, anything to make her feel human again. Each visit stretched longer, and each one deepened the guilt gnawing at him. Julian wasn't blind. One night, he found a receipt for a coat Ethan had bought for Lila. "You're still seeing her?" he demanded, his voice shaking with betrayal. Ethan tried to explain. It wasn't romantic, it was compassion. But Julian wasn't listening. "You're choosing her over me," he said, his eyes wet with tears. "You're tearing us apart for someone you barely know." Ethan's heart twisted. He loved Julian, loved the man who'd stood by him through lawsuits, family rejections, and the chaos of building a tech empire. But Lila's need was immediate, visceral, and it pulled at a part of him Julian couldn't touch. "I'm not choosing her," Ethan said, but even he heard the uncertainty in his voice. Julian's face crumpled, and he walked out, leaving Ethan with the echo of the door slamming. The next day, Ethan found Lila at a coffee shop near the shelter, a rare outing she'd earned with good behavior. She looked almost like her old self, her smile tentative but real. "You don't have to keep coming," she said, stirring her coffee. "I'm not your responsibility." But Ethan couldn't walk away. He saw in her a mirror of his own past. A kid who'd clawed his way out of poverty, who'd been given a chance when he needed it most. Helping her felt like honoring that. They talked for hours, and Ethan realized he was crossing a line. Not of love, but of connection. Lila wasn't just a project. She was a person who made him question his place in the world. When he got home, Julian was packing a suitcase. "I can't do this," Julian said, his voice raw. "I can't watch you throw our life away for her. Choose, Ethan. Her or me." The ultimatum hit like a punch. Ethan's mind raced. Julian, his anchor, his love. Lila, a stranger who'd become a symbol of something bigger. "I'm not choosing her over you," he said, desperation creeping in. "I'm choosing to be the man you fell in love with, the one who cares, who fights for what's right." Julian shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "That's not what this is. You're lost, Ethan. And I can't wait for you to find yourself." Julian left that night, the mansion's silence heavier than ever. Ethan sat on the couch, staring at the wedding photo on the mantel. Two smiling men, naive to the storms ahead. He wanted to chase Julian, to beg him to stay, but something held him back. Lila's face flashed in his mind, and with it, a truth he couldn't ignore. Helping her was changing him, and he wasn't sure he could stop. Ethan's days blurred into a haze of guilt and purpose. Julian's absence was a wound that bled quietly, seeping into every corner of the mansion. Yet Ethan kept returning to the shelter, driven by a need he couldn't fully explain. Lila was making progress, attending therapy, applying for jobs, but her victories felt like his, too, a lifeline in the chaos of his crumbling marriage. He told himself he was helping her for the right reasons, but doubts crept in. Was he using Lila to fill a void? To prove something to himself or to Julian? He avoided the wedding photo now, its joy a stark contrast to the emptiness he felt. Friends noticed the change, his distracted replies, his absence at social events. "You're losing yourself," his best friend, Marcus, warned over lunch. "Julian was your center. What are you doing?" Ethan didn't have an answer. He only knew that every time he saw Lila smile, it felt like a small victory against the world's cruelty. One afternoon, she showed him a letter, a job offer from a clinic, a chance to reclaim her old life. "I wouldn't be here without you," she said, her voice steady for the first time. Ethan's heart swelled, but it was bittersweet. He'd given her a path forward, but at what cost? That night, he found a voicemail from Julian. "I miss you," Julian said, his voice breaking, "but I can't come back until you figure out what you want." Ethan played it again and again, each word a knife. He wanted Julian, wanted their life, their love, but he couldn't shake the pull of Lila's recovery. It wasn't about her, not really. It was about the part of him that needed to make a difference. He met Lila at the shelter the next day, her eyes brighter than ever. She'd started training at the clinic, her confidence growing. "You're like a guardian angel," she said, laughing lightly. Ethan smiled, but the words stung. Angels didn't lose their husbands. Angels didn't feel this torn. He wanted to tell her about Julian, about the ultimatum, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he helped her move into a small apartment, a milestone that should have felt triumphant, but only deepened his unease. At home, Ethan found a note from Julian, left on the kitchen counter during a brief visit to grab clothes. "I'm staying with my sister," it read. "I love you, but I need you to choose us." Ethan's hands shook as he read it. He wanted to call, to drive to Julian's sister's house, to beg for forgiveness. But what would he say? That he'd stop helping Lila? That he'd go back to being the man who lived in a bubble of wealth and safety? He didn't call. Instead, he threw himself into Lila's cause, helping her navigate bureaucracy, connecting her with old colleagues. Each step forward for her felt like a step away from Julian. One night, Lila invited him to her apartment for dinner, a simple meal of pasta and cheap wine, but it was the first time she'd cooked for someone in years. They laughed, shared stories, and for a moment, Ethan felt lighter. But when he left, the weight returned. He was building something with Lila, but he was losing Julian in the process. The breaking point came when Marcus called, his voice urgent. "Julian's not okay, Ethan. He's falling apart. You need to fix this." Ethan's stomach dropped. He'd been so focused on Lila, on his mission, that he'd ignored the man who'd been his everything. He drove to Julian's sister's house, his heart pounding. When Julian opened the door, his eyes were red, his face gaunt. "Why are you here?" Julian asked, his voice hollow. "I love you," Ethan said, the words spilling out. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen." Julian's gaze was unflinching. "Then stop. Stop choosing her." Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came. He wanted to promise, to swear he'd walk away from Lila, but the thought of abandoning her felt like betraying himself. Julian's face hardened. "That's what I thought," he said, and closed the door. Ethan stood there, rain starting to fall again, the same rain that had led him to Lila. He'd made his choice, even if he hadn't said it out loud, and it was breaking his heart. Ethan drove aimlessly through the city, the rain blurring his windshield like the thoughts blurring his mind. Julian's door, closed in his face, was a symbol of everything he'd lost. He wanted to turn back, to pound on that door until Julian listened, but he knew it wouldn't change anything. His choice, unspoken but real, had been made the moment he kept going back to Lila. He didn't go home. Instead, he found himself at Lila's apartment, the small space now filled with signs of her new life. Books, a second-hand couch, a plant she'd named Hope. She opened the door, surprised but welcoming. "You okay?" she asked, her nurse's instincts kicking in. Ethan shook his head, the weight of the night spilling out. He told her everything, Julian's ultimatum, the fight, the door closing. Lila listened, her eyes soft with understanding. "You're doing so much for me," she said, "but you can't lose him for it." Her words hit hard. Ethan had been telling himself he was helping Lila for her sake, but now he saw the truth. It was for him, too. Helping her made him feel alive, purposeful, like he was more than his money or his name. But it had cost him Julian, and the realization was a gut punch. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted, his voice raw. Lila reached for his hand, her touch steady. "You fix it by being honest, with him, with yourself. You're not my savior, Ethan. You're my friend. But you can't save me at the expense of your life." Her words were a mirror, forcing him to see the mess he'd made. He'd been chasing a version of himself he thought he needed to be, but he'd lost sight of the man Julian loved. The next day, Ethan called Julian, leaving a voicemail when he didn't answer. "I'm sorry," he said. "I need to see you. Please." He didn't know if Julian would listen, but he had to try. He spent the day reflecting, piecing together the choices that had led him here. Lila was thriving. She'd started her job, was rebuilding her life, but Ethan's life was unraveling. He couldn't keep living in two worlds. Julian agreed to meet at a park neutral ground. He looked tired, his usual confidence replaced by a guarded wariness. "Why am I here, Ethan?" he asked, his voice flat. Ethan took a breath, the words he'd rehearsed tumbling out. "I messed up. I thought I was helping Lila, but I was running from something in me. I love you, Julian. I choose you. I always will." Julian's eyes searched his, looking for the truth. "Then why did it take so long?" he asked, his voice breaking. Ethan didn't have a clean answer. He could only say, "I was afraid of losing myself, but losing you is worse." Julian didn't respond, but he didn't walk away either. They sat in silence, the space between them softening, just a little. Ethan scaled back his time with Lila, setting boundaries to protect what he was trying to rebuild with Julian. Lila understood. She was stronger now, less dependent. "You gave me a chance," she told him one day. "Now give yourself one." Her words stayed with him as he worked to repair his marriage, showing up for Julian in ways he hadn't before. Small gestures, honest conversations, time. But the damage wasn't easily undone. Julian was hesitant, his trust bruised. They went to counseling, laying bare their fears and hopes. Ethan learned to listen, to see Julian's pain as clearly as he'd seen Lila's. It was slow, painful work, but each session felt like a step toward something stronger. Ethan began to understand that love wasn't just passion. It was choosing each other, every day, even when it hurt. One evening, Julian reached for Ethan's hand, the first time in months. "I want us to work," he said softly. Ethan's heart leapt, but he knew it wasn't a guarantee. It was a chance, and he'd take it. He'd chosen Julian, but he'd also chosen himself, the version that could love fully, without losing sight of what mattered. Months later, Ethan stood on the balcony of their mansion, the city lights twinkling below. Julian was beside him, their shoulders brushing, a quiet intimacy they'd fought to reclaim. The journey hadn't been easy. There were still nights when doubts crept in, when Julian's guarded looks reminded Ethan of the pain he'd caused. But they were here, together, choosing each other. Lila was thriving. She'd become a nurse again, working at a clinic that served the community she'd once been part of. Ethan saw her occasionally, always with Julian's knowledge, their meetings now professional, focused on her advocacy for the homeless. She'd become a symbol of resilience, speaking at events Ethan funded, her story inspiring others. Ethan felt proud, but it was a quieter pride now, one that didn't consume him. He and Julian had rebuilt their marriage on a stronger foundation: honesty, vulnerability, and a shared commitment to giving back. They started a foundation together, channeling Ethan's wealth into programs for the homeless, with Lila's input guiding their mission. It wasn't about saving anyone. It was about creating systems that gave people like Lila a chance to save themselves. One night, at a fundraiser for the foundation, Lila took the stage. Her voice was clear, powerful, as she shared her story. Not just of loss, but of hope, of the man who'd seen her when she was invisible. Ethan felt Julian's hand squeeze his, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they'd taken. Lila's eyes met theirs, and she smiled, a thank you that needed no words. After the event, Ethan and Julian walked along the Embarcadero, the bay's breeze cool against their skin. "I'm proud of you," Julian said, his voice soft but sure. Ethan stopped, turning to face him. "I'm proud of us," he said. "We made it through." Julian's smile was small but real, and for the first time in months, Ethan felt whole. The choice he'd made wasn't just about Julian or Lila. It was about becoming a man who could hold both compassion and love without letting one destroy the other. He'd almost lost everything, but in the end, he'd found something better. A life where he could give without losing himself, where he could love without fear. As they stood together, watching the city's lights reflect on the water, Ethan realized that the true victory wasn't in fixing the world or even his marriage. It was in the messy, beautiful act of choosing, every day, every moment, to show up, to care, to love. He'd chosen Julian, but he'd also chosen a life that honored the man he wanted to be. And that, he knew, was enough.